Hey, everybody. Welcome to the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We got a great interview for you today. David Corn in just a couple of minutes. First, I just want to thank you for tuning in today. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. All right, David Corn. He is the Washington, D.C. bureau chief for Mother Jones Magazine. He's also an MSNBC analyst and author of the New York Times bestselling book, American Psychosis, a historical investigation of how the Republican Party went crazy. David, welcome into the back room.
Great to be here.
Before we get into the craziness of politics, which there's certainly a lot of lately, I just want to peel back the onion a little bit and understand you as a kid. Were you always turned on by politics and journalism?
Yeah, I guess it became, my mom was sort of like a New York Times devotee. I grew up outside New York City. And so reading the newspaper and being informed was very important in our household. I didn't think about it as politics or journalism. It's just like you're supposed to read the paper and know what's going on and read Time magazine, whatever else we got. I grew up, I was too young to participate in the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, but I kind of grew up feeling there was all this ferment out there, beyond the suburbs where I lived, and it just felt there was a lot of churn and even to some degree chaos that was unsettling. As I got into my adolescent years, I took my love of public affairs and reading the newspaper and this unsettled feeling, and it became more coherent in a political manner. And I remember in 1972, when I was 13, like being a big George McGovern fan. Nixon came to town. I got into fights with hard hats who threw bricks at me as I put up McGovern posters along the Nixon parade route. And when, Nixon came through town and he, and did this motorcade thing with the open car, you could go up and shake his hand. I went up and he put out his hand. I said, "I'm not shaking your hand. If I could, I'd vote for George McGovern." And
how old were you when you did this?
I was 13, and a Secret Service guy literally picked me up like a cartoon and threw me in the air. I was not, I was a pretty slim 13-year-old. And fortunately, I was wearing a backpack at the time, and I landed right on the backpack, on my back on the backpack, and it cushioned the fall. So it was very Watergate, started shortly thereafter, that made me think about journalism. I, saw what was happening in the press, Washington Post, Woodward and Bernstein, and realized that one way you could be involved in politics in the large sense, that is, in shaping the world, was by promoting the truth and revealing corruption and wrongdoing. And it just seemed to me that was more fun than politics itself. Being a journalist, you could call up people, ask questions, you get to write, you get to travel. So that really put me on a journalism kick. And in high school, I was, I worked for the school paper, and I declared myself an investigative reporter. And I did stories on the drug dealers in my school and where they got how they got their supplies, which is kind of interesting. They were, at some point it goes back to an unsavory character, even, in a nice suburb of White Plains, New York. And I also did a story about the Unification Church, which was rising in that time and was big in my region. And, I talked to people in Congress as a high school student, about reporting. They were, about reports they were putting out on the ties between the Unification Church and the Korean Central Intelligence Agency and lobbying on the Hill. And so I got started that way.
How did the high school kids take to you writing about their drug dealing? That must have made you popular. Or was it
was kind of
anonymous?
fun. I mean, I gave all the dealers some, like, all who I kind of knew. They weren't like my best friends, but I knew of them, knew them. I gave them all pseudonyms, so I didn't reveal who they were. The whole point was not to reveal the drug deals, but to explain how the system worked and where the drugs were coming from, how they got them. And it was mainly weed and hash back then. And after the story came out, I got called to the principal's office, and who is sitting there but two detectives from the White Plains Police Department.
They want the real names, let me guess.
Yeah, and they tried to convince me that I was not doing these people any favors by protecting their identities, that, they were dealing with dangerous people, and, they were, and if they could talk to them first, without arresting them, that would be better for everybody. And and the journalism advisor was there and was, kind of siding with the cops in a way. And I held firm. I did not reveal my sources. And, it kind of blew over.
And the rest is history, as they say. You mentioned Woodward and Bernstein. I gather they were inspirations for you. And if so, were there others during that time?
Well, they are the ones that stood out. But what I really, in the conventional media, but it was what I really liked a lot and what influenced me a lot was the Village Voice, which was a great weekly newspaper at that time, with some great, wonderful journalists, as well as columnists, as well as, wonderful cultural coverage. So I, it came out on Wednesdays, and every Wednesday I walked the mile to the stationery store that had a newsstand, and I would buy the Voice. And there was a lot of the stuff was about New York City and was very much in the weeds. And I didn't always understand what they were reporting on or who the players were. But it was always just interesting to read and try to, see what they were doing that was in some ways somewhat different than the New York Times. And also in that era, Rolling Stone magazine was doing lots of wonderful investigative reporting on Nixon finances and ties between fugitive financier Robert Vesco and American politicians. There was just, they did great reporting on Karen Silkwood. That might have come a little bit later. So that, that was pretty influential too. It was sort of the alternative countercultural reporting and, that was happening in these places, and places like Ramparts, which was a kind of an early version of Mother Jones, or inspired Mother Jones a few years later. And that was sort of through high school. Once I got to college, reading Mother Jones and The Nation and, the real paper and the Boston Phoenix out of Boston. I was going to school in Providence, continuing with the Voice, were very important influences to me.
So let's get to the present tense. Let's talk about Trump for a second. Do you see this interview he did on Monday with Bret Baier as something new, unique, highly incriminating, or is it just more of the same Trump going on interviews here and there and blabbing up a storm like he always does? Is this something different?
I mean, I don't think there was a strategic, pivot here on Trump's part. I mean, he often seems to, to believe that if he admits wrongdoing, it's not wrong, or at least it's not a crime. If you say it, it's not a crime. But I mean, I think ultimately he believes, and this is part of his narcissistic pathology, that he can't do anything that is wrong. So, why not say it?
Right.
I mean, he knows not to admit certain things, of course, but even when, I was just looking at this the other day, that, you remember the Trump Tower meeting that happened in June of 2016, where top folks in his campaign, Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort, met with a Russian emissary who said, who they were told was bringing them dirt on Hillary Clinton as part of a secret Russian effort to help the Trump campaign. And they went ahead and met with her, and they claimed nothing came out of it. I think the significance of the meeting was that the Trump campaign signaled to Moscow by accepting the meeting that they were, didn't mind the secret Russian intervention in the campaign and attack on American democracy. And in fact, they welcomed it. But that did not come out before the election. It came out about a year later. And when it came out, Donald Trump dictated a statement to his son that the meeting was just about adoption.
Right.
Adoption policy, Americans adopting Russian kids, which was a complete lie. That was not the point of the meeting. The point was trying to get dirt on Hillary Clinton, and that was indeed discussed at the meeting. And so he lied about it. And then, a year or so later, emails come out showing that that's not what the meeting was about, that it was about trying to get opposition research. And at that point, Trump just said, well, there's nothing wrong with getting opposition research. You meet with people who say they have things to tell you about your opponent. Of course you can do that. So okay, so now you're admitting that you lied when you lied to cover up the meeting. And he just, that moment in time, he just said what he said. I don't think he really bothers to keep his story straight. Mm-hmm. He believes that bluster is more important than consistency.
Yeah.
So he'll just change, he's very much like in football with a quarterback, an audible player. He'll look at whatever's happening at that moment, look at the line, look at the line of attack against him, and say whatever he thinks he needs to get out of that moment or advance in that moment, not thinking about what he said before, what consequences that might have for the future. Mm-hmm. And then, another, opportunity, another, episode comes up, and again, he'll just say whatever he needs to say at that point in time.
Right. You mentioned what he likes to say, referred to as Russia, Russia, Russia. You mentioned that investigation, but you wrote a piece a couple of days ago in Mother Jones with a colleague, Dan Friedman.
Yes, Dan Friedman.
And the gist of it was that John Durham, who was brought in the Justice Department to oversee the investigation of the FBI's involvement in that investigation, that he lied this week when he went before Congress. Talk to us a little bit about it.
Yeah. We said he made false statements to Congress.
Right.
Lying is, is another thing. And, he might have lied. And
is there a difference between false statements and lying?
Well, yes. There is to a certain extent. You could lie on you can make a false statement in error. I could tell you, I'm wearing a blue shirt, and then you go before Congress and say David's wearing a blue shirt when my shirt is red, but you didn't know that. But it's a false statement, but it's not necessarily a lie because, you did not see me and I told you I was wearing a blue shirt.
Right.
Remember what George Costanza told Jerry Seinfeld, if you think it's true, it's not a lie. But in the context of this piece, he, made two factual misstatements that were of major points, major issues in the Russian investigation, that it's almost inconceivable to believe he didn't know the truth here.
Right.
And, the first one was, it regards the meeting that I just mentioned. When Adam Schiff asked him about it, he said, that basically people made too much of this meeting and it was all a ruse and that they didn't even talk about Hillary Clinton at the meeting. Well, that's demonstrably untrue, inaccurate, false. Robert Mueller cites several people who participated in the meeting saying that indeed they did discuss the so-called dirt that the Russian emissary, a lawyer from Russia sent by a government official, had on Hillary Clinton. It was kind of convoluted and not clear what exactly she was talking about. And so it wasn't usable opposition research, but it was indeed opposition research about Hillary Clinton. So that's what they were there to do. That's why they had the meeting. That's why they showed up. And Donald Trump Jr. asked, do you have more on her? Can you explain this? Because, it didn't seem to resonate with him. So that was just wrong for him to say that meeting did not, is sort of dismissing the significance of this meeting and say, well, it really wasn't about Hillary Clinton. So that was just outright wrong and demonstrably false. And then at another time, a congressman raised the issue, said that, the Democrats claim that, there were contacts between Trump campaign and Russian intelligence, and he said, in response to that, there's no such evidence. And that's a direct quote. There's no such evidence. Well, we do know that Paul Manafort, who was the chief executive of the campaign for much of 2016, while he was chief executive of the campaign, met secretly with a guy named Konstantin Kilimnik.
Mm-hmm.
He gave him internal polling data from the Trump campaign, which Kilimnik passed on to a Russian oligarch. And that, according to Robert Mueller, the Senate Select Committee, in a report put out when the committee was chaired by Marco Rubio, a Republican, and the U.S. Treasury Department, Konstantin Kilimnik is a Russian intelligence officer. So here we have, again, multiple, government agencies, Congress, Special Counsel, and the U.S. Treasury Department declaring Kilimnik a Russian intelligence officer or agent. And there's no question that and he used to work for he used to work for Paul Manafort when Manafort was a consultant and doing work in Ukraine. There's no question that Manafort met with him. That's, not at issue. So again, it's false. It's patently false, brazenly false to say there's no evidence of contacts between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It's the head of the campaign meeting with an identified Russian intelligence officer. And you would expect someone who spent, 4 years investigating the Russian investigation
would know that.
To know these two basic facts. And that's, we put in our piece, it's almost inconceivable that he does not know this. Why would he say this? I mean, he seemed to be echoing the general, Trump false narrative
mm-hmm.
that that meeting was nothing and there were no contacts.
And that was also pointed out in a sense when Congressman Ted Lieu from California was questioning him, and Lieu pointed out that this seemingly willful defiance and evasiveness is an indication of something nefarious, and it's hard to escape that being the case. With regard to Trump, do you think we're at some inflection point now that we've been waiting for, with him being a wounded animal, with him being attacked from, all these people who are running against him, a lot of his staunch supporters in the party are running for the hills? Does this feel any different to you?
Well, it's different, but I wouldn't call it an inflection point. Mm-hmm. I mean, Trump's not out of it until he's out of it.
Right.
I mean, he can run for president.
But is it
jail.
a dead man walk? Is it like a dead man walking kind of out of it thing?
I don't think so at all.
Not with Georgia, New York, the federal government legally after him.
We don't know. I mean, we don't know what indictments are coming. We know the ones that have hit. We don't know when the trials will be. They're likely to be delayed, and will he get to trial on the felony indictment charge for allegedly pilfering classified documents? Will that happen before the election? Will happen before the primaries? Probably not before the primaries. He's, when will he be convicted? He still will run for office. I don't think any of this stuff is going to drive him out of the race. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing that prevents Republicans from voting for a guy who's indicted. And it's even, we have never seen this, but even if he ends up being convicted, I don't know if that, will stop him from being elected president. I mean, the thing is that, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't have a convicted criminal, someone in jail serving as president. And why is that? Because I'm sure the founders could not envision this. if you asked Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, well, what would happen if, you elected, if someone got elected and then he was convicted of a crime and sent to jail? Well, I think they would say, well, the obvious thing is you would impeach him. Congress would get together and impeach him. They did not foresee a political structure that was so written with political tribalism and what they would call in their day factionalism. So, of course, rational people, whatever their political proclivities, would assemble and remove from office somebody who was convicted. Now, I don't know, would Kevin McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all those Republicans vote to impeach Trump if they're in power in next Congress and he ends up in the who's gal, or would they not? And what happens? Would they? Would we? Would his vice presidential pick, maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene? Would they then invoke the 25th Amendment and make her president, or whoever his VP is? I mean, we're in tremendously uncharted waters because fundamentally 30% of the country remains Trumpified.
Right.
They believe all the crazy conspiracy theories, from Barack Obama being a secret socialist Muslim born in Kenya to the deep state plotting to take over Twitter to control, your minds and keep Donald Trump from winning elections, and Russia being a hoax and all that sort of stuff. That's what they believe. And Trump still has, and as long as they're out there and as long as they're willing to vote for Trump, which they seem to be according to polls, then Trump remains a threat, a danger, authoritarian threat, an autocratic threat. And there's no way for the Republican Party, for the poobahs who are spineless to begin with, but if they should grow a spine, there's no way to really get them out if these voters stick with them.
Mm. It's so funny.
I mean, it's not a Trump problem. It's not a Trump problem. Ultimately, it's an American problem.
Well, it's a Trumpism problem, which is American. You mentioned the Constitution, and I'm old enough now to have heard for so many years that the founding fathers, they created this path for Congress if there should ever be someone like Trump, articles of impeachment, 25th Amendment. And then someone like Trump actually comes along, and we realize that the Constitution provides no measure of remedy in a real, meaningful way for someone like Trump. It does for someone like Nixon, perhaps, but not like Trump. And I don't know how we fix that.
Well, yeah, I mean, so much of our system is predicated on rules and norms and not laws.
Right.
Right? A good example is when you go into the White House, you're supposed to fill out a government ethics report about any financial conflicts of interest you might have. And there's an officer in the White House who, if they see something, they work out an arrangement. You can sell the property, you can put in a blunt trust, these stocks, or you can be recused on these issues. But if you just say, screw it, I'm not going to do this, there's no ethics cop or police that come knocking in and haul you off to ethics jail. Mm-hmm. It's like, we just expect people to do these things because that's what the rules are.
And that's what people have done.
And the Trump people came in and they said, we don't care about that. We don't believe that we need to follow rules. We don't, one rule is that there needs to be distance, a post-Watergate rule between the White House and the Justice Department. Well, we don't need to follow that. That's the law. That's not in the Constitution. No, we've just saw at Watergate and other times that this was what's best for the country. And so, but Trump came in and said, I don't, want to do that. And now there's a whole movement in the conservative, policy world to explicitly state that there should not be independence between the White House and the Justice Department. So when a Republican gets back in the White House, that he can control who gets prosecuted. Imagine Trump having that power.
Right.
So, in Watergate, the Republicans, once the smoking gun tape came out, went to Nixon, Senator Barry Goldwater and others, and said, we can't support you anymore. This is just too egregious. You broke the law. And we have it on tape. And, and Nixon shortly resigned after that. It's inconceivable now, after January 6th, that there's anything Trump could do that would cause Republicans to say that. They did not impeach him over January 6th. They did not break with him. He's out there saying he would suspend, that they should suspend the Constitution and restore him to power. He's out there amplifying QAnon conspiracy theory, which says that Democrats and others are satanic cabal that eats babies and rigs elections. He's out there dining with anti-Semites like Kanye West and neo-Nazi folks, Nick Fuentes, and saying that he would pardon all the January 6th rioters, thereby excusing political violence and even encouraging it. So, and none of that has them turning away from him.
No, and he can go on Brett Baer on Fox and basically admit to taking documents and obstructing justice, and it still doesn't matter. I want to spend our last couple of minutes just asking you one final question about your piece last week on No Labels and Anecdote, because I think this kind of dark money shenanigans is really responsible for a lot of the bad stuff in this country right now.
Yeah, well, No Labels is a dark money group that wants to get ballot access for 2024. So they can come up with what they call a unity ticket to run, against presumably Biden or Trump or whoever might be there. They claim they're against the left, they're against the right. People don't like Biden as a candidate. People like Trump as a candidate. So a unity ticket, could succeed. Of course, it can't succeed. And a lot of Democratic strategists and never Trump Republican operatives believe that, this effort would more likely siphon votes from Biden than Trump, and, therefore help Trump perhaps get elected again. And No Labels, the thing about it, like, many groups in politics, it's what we call dark money group, which means you can't see who's giving money to the group. And, that raises all sorts of questions about who's funding this and why are they doing this. I did a story noting that the online, processing firm that they use is actually a far right firm that raises money for election denialists, Trump supporters, political organizations, nonprofits, and candidates, including Jim Jordan, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Republican Party entities. And so what that means is the people who go to the website and donate because they like the middle, they don't like, they don't want to be lefty, they don't want to be righty, they buy the line of No Labels, go to the website and donate, say, $100, $4 goes to this company, Anecdote, which is committed to raising funds only for far-right conservative groups, and as I said, election denialists and very Trumpy organizations like Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA and Focus Family, and groups that are advocating for a total abortion ban. So that struck me as incredibly odd and bizarre, and I was the first to reveal that, and it got a lot of attention on Twitter, and it suggested to me that either they are not very savvy or they're not very careful. I mean, they would not explain to me how they ended up working with this organization, with this company.
Yeah, and you got the name of their comms director, but they refused to give you the email address, which is like ridiculous.
Yeah, I called up and asked for Marianne Martini, the communications deputy for No Labels, and they said, well, you should send her an email. I said, okay, fine. What's her email address? Oh, we can't give that to you. I've covered politics for decades, and I've never had a political organization that would not give you the email or the direct line of its press secretary.
Right.
I said, well, I guess you'll have to take a message. And they said, well, we'll do that. And I never heard back from her.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on, and appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. That's episode 88. If you like what you've been hearing, and even if you don't, let us know. We appreciate the feedback. You can leave us a message at 845-307-7446. Email us at backroomandy@gmail.com or tweet to me at Andy Ostroy. And when you listen, please take a quick moment to rate and review. It's very helpful. And if you do like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. I want to thank my co-producer, engineer, and editor, Matty Rosenberg, associate producer, Jen Hammoud, Cricket Lengyel for our artwork, Andy Hollander for our kick-ass music, Patricia Wind and the Epicurean for the Backroom Studio, and a big thank you again to our guest, David Corn. So keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and we hope you'll join us again next time. Have a great week.